Well, why don't I at least establish the ground rules so that when Mr. Winslow decides to join us, we can launch right ahead into the forum. I'm going to ask that the audience remain silent for the next 60 minutes. As when our final candidate comes in and they shake hands, if you'd like to get the applause out of your system, feel free to do it then. Please do turn your cell phones off. If you are live blogging or tweeting or updating, all of which is fine, please make sure your ringer is off. My role tonight as moderator is simply going to be to keep the candidates on track, to keep them succinct, to introduce our panelists, and to go through various rounds of questioning and a lightning round about 20-25 minutes into tonight's forum. Welcome all of you to Stonehill College. My name is Peter Ubertasio. I am the director of the Martin Institute for Law and Society, the host for tonight's event. I really appreciate you coming out in this horrible weather to hear three candidates for the United States Senate. And we do now have three candidates for the United States Senate. All right, welcome everyone. Why don't we get started straight away? Tonight's event is going to be very straightforward. Our three panelists this evening, from left to right, Chris Burrell from the Patriot Ledger, Adam Riley from WGBH, and Janet Wu from WCVB. We'll pose questions, and each candidate will have an opportunity to respond. After two full rounds of questions, we will have a lightning round of questions that should elicit very brief responses. Then back to our panelists' questions. Why don't we start right away with our first round? Round one will be on economic issues, and Chris Burrell will ask the first question.
First question goes to Mr. Gomez. Mr. Gomez, Senator Warren wants to prosecute, not just fine banks that have broken the laws. If you win, you'll be serving with her. Will you work with her or fight her on this one?
I will work with all senators, whether they're Democrats or Republicans. And so I would look forward to working with Senator Warren, whether it's dealing with financial issues, whether it's dealing with national security issues, environmental issues, climate change, immigration, gun control, et cetera. So I have a very open mind, and that's part of my background, to go down there and work, in an open manner. Because I think what we have right now, unfortunately, is we have career politicians that are down there that are so steep in their ideological beliefs that they're not willing to work with each other, whether they're on the same side or not. And that is exactly what's wrong down there right now. I mean, a great example is the sequestration, where these career politicians followed up a virus and mailed it to themselves, and now look what happened.
Can I keep you to the point, though, on this issue of banks that have broken the law? The United States Justice Department has fined them, but chosen not to actually prosecute them. What's your take on that?
I don't believe that any bank or any institution is A, too big to fail, and B, too big to prosecute. I was surprised when Attorney General Holder came out and said that there could be potentially certain businesses or corporations that would be too big to prosecute. I mean, that's one of the things, obviously, that we need to work on, and that you can't have something that becomes so big it becomes immune to any kind of either oversight, purview, or prosecution.
Thank you. Mr. Sullivan?
Well, this is an area I spent a great deal of time looking at when I was United States Attorney, and it's a constant challenge in terms of trying to balance, prosecuting a company and then the significant collateral consequences that would result from doing that. I think a great example is Arthur Andersen. I mean, the fact of the matter is companies don't commit crime, people commit crime. And we learned from the Arthur Andersen example is that unintended consequences occur as a result of prosecuting a company. So we can't just blindly go in and prosecute a company. We have to realize that you're going to have potentially shareholders, pensioners, employees who are clearly victims and not co-conspirators that will suffer. I think what you really have to do is you have to focus your energy and effort on those people that actually commit the crime and hold them accountable. And I think that's really one of the weaknesses or downfalls in terms of the Department of Justice. They spend a lot of time getting a lot of money from big companies. Quite candidly, I think the focus should be on the employees within the organization that should be held accountable. Companies sometimes look at this as a cost of doing business and no further consequences. But if you hold those people that actually committed the crime accountable, I think you'd see those events get fewer and fewer, particularly if you send people to jail. And that's what we did when I was United States Attorney. We looked at the conduct of the company, but we also tried to identify and prosecute the individuals who were responsible. The last thing I wanted to do was to essentially have an unintended consequence and have somebody lose their job through no fault of their own.
Thank you. Mr. Winslow?
I agree that companies don't usually commit crimes and people do, but in that particular case, people who committed the crimes didn't suffer the consequences, the same consequences that people who actually peddled dope suffer. And I think that that was Senator Warren's point. So I think that we have to look at the exercise of unfettered discretion by federal prosecutorial authorities, whether it's decisions not to prosecute in the cases of banks that are perceived to be too big to fail, or in the case of Aaron Swartz, somebody who was prosecuted with no criminal record, with no intention to make any personal profit, who had all the world to live for, and was offered, and I use offered in quotes, 6 months of incarceration as a first offender. That kind of overreach by prosecutorial authorities, and the other extreme, I think, is something that inhibits our liberty interests. If we criminalize all conduct in America, then people don't know whether to stand or sit. So I think there has to be some sense of proportion, some sense of balance in our prosecutorial decisions, and I think that's where the Senate has a role to play, because clearly this unfettered discretion hasn't worked. It hasn't, in my view, served the interests of justice on either side of the equation, and that's what I hope to be able to accomplish if I go to the U.S. Senate.
Well, if I can just add, it's not unfettered discretion that prosecutors have. I've served for about 15 years as a state and federal prosecutor, and we're bound by the rules of law. We're bound by the Constitution as well. There's checks and balances built into the system. There obviously is discretion, and oftentimes discretion is exercised by declining a prosecution under the right set of circumstances. I think the point here is, do we prosecute a company just for the sake of saying we're tough and have people lose their jobs, have retirees lose their pension, have shareholders lose their investment? Within the Department of Justice, there's guidance and guidelines in the circumstances in which you would consider or decline a prosecution, which I think is very helpful for prosecutors. Senators should not be prosecuting. Senators should be making the law, and the court should be interpreting it, and the executives should be exercising it.
Well, and that's where we disagree, because I believe that the legislative branch and the Senate has an obligation to define those parameters, and where there have been abuses, and I submit that there have been abuses, taking those two examples, the bank case, too big to fail, and the first offender, too small not to put in jail. I think that those are examples of exactly where the system is broken, and I think that that's a role in the check and balance and the constitutional process to rein in what I view to be unfettered prosecutorial discretion.
All right. Question 2 will be posed by Adam Riley.
Hoping we can move on to the economy for a moment. Can everyone hear me? Is this thing on, to coin a phrase? No? There we go.
There you go.
I do the opposite. Okay. Just to talk about the economy briefly, right now, unemployment is the lowest that it's been in 6 years. The stock market is booming. The Dow recently hit a record high point. And sequestration, which some people, including President Obama, said was going to be incredibly dire, doesn't, in fact, seem to be all that horrific. Do we really need some sort of a quote-unquote grand bargain on the budget? Or given how well things seem to be going at the particular moment, could we just stick with the status quo?
We'll start with Mr. Sullivan.
Well, thank you. I think sticking with the status quo is a complete failure on the part of our government. I mean, we're fortunate that the stock market is doing well. We've seen the right direction concerning the unemployment numbers, but I think we're far too high to celebrate. There's still far too many Americans that are unemployed. There's far too many that are underemployed as well. There's far too many that are relying on government assistance, with 1 in 7 relying upon food stamps. That, to me, is not a reason to be celebrating. Sequestration, quite candidly, I think our government was trying to frighten us into some of these horrific events. You know, people I've spoken with around the Commonwealth of Massachusetts, when they think about budget cuts, they think about real budget cuts that have had an effect on decisions that they had to make for their family. You know, whether it's higher education, whether it's health care, whether it's an ability to pay a car payment. And here our government was fretting over a 2% cut, 2%. Now, I served within the Department of Justice, at a time that we were fighting a war, and we were required to essentially rescind a portion of our budget, far in excess of 2%. I mean, the fact of the matter is, as leaders, you determine your priorities. Government does far more than what it's needed to do. I suspect if you give them more money, they'll find even more things to do. So you ask the government to cut 2%. I think the great failure here is sequestration is across the board, both domestic and on the military side. And there are certain parts in the military side that I think everybody in this room would be greatly concerned about cutting, particularly as it relates to the support and services to men and women in uniform. I see a lot of faces out there. Some of these folks may enlist at some point in their life. And my commitment is to make sure that anybody that serves in the United States Armed Forces has all the requisite training and all the requisite equipment to make sure that they're able to successfully complete their mission as quickly and as safely as they possibly can. And that was the failure of sequestration. No catastrophic consequences, but continued budget cuts. 2%, I think, hardly is a hardship in terms of our government.
Thank you, Mr. Winslow.
I think it's a sad day in America when we count as an improvement in the unemployment rate the fact that people are giving up looking for jobs, that we have so many people who are working part-time or less than full-time, or that they're underutilized, and somehow that's a win. And so if you think things are going well, vote for the other guys, because I'm here to try to change things in Washington, and I believe that sequestration was exhibit A for what's wrong in Washington. You know, the people in Washington on both sides of the aisle are so content to do this and finger point at each other rather than solving problems. And so they resorted to these scare tactics of this sequestration and to try to scare people into blinking. And so, no, it's less than a 3% cut. We do need to grow down the budget, but we should do it in a way, just as we add to a budget in a budget process that reflects our values and our priorities, we should also grow down a budget in a way that reflects our values and priorities and not resort to scare tactics. The White House just last week announced that they were going to cancel White House tours at the cost, according to ABC News, of just $18,000 a week. And yet at the same time, if you go to Twitter, you'll see the hashtag sequester this, that there are so many examples of wasteful and profligate spending that we could easily reduce federal spending by that do reflect our values. And so my hope is to be part of the dialogue in Washington in a way that focuses on solving problems. I have a unique experience of any candidate of having served in 3 branches of government, and that's what we do. We roll up our sleeves, get it done, and grow down the federal budget. It's our mission to do that.
Mr. Gomez, your opponents don't sound overly concerned about sequestration. I think you referred to it as a virus wrapped up by Congress and mailed to itself. Do you agree with their take here?
No, but to answer your question at the beginning, in terms of the unemployment rate being down at the lowest it's been in 6 years, 7.7%, that is just only one indicator. I mean, obviously the stock market's another indicator, but if you look at the unemployment rate for people under 30, it's about 12.5%. And you've got the unemployment rate throughout the country at 7.7% here. And that is just one indicator. People have lacked confidence in the economy right now. Companies right now throughout, and everybody here can attest to that, they're not investing in their corporations right now, and they're not hiring right now. There's a lot of uncertainty going on. There's a lot of regulations within the economy coming on from the government. And people have a lack of confidence, which is hindering the economic growth. And that's the only way there's 2 ways we're going to get out of where we are right now. One is you have to address the $16 trillion plus debt that we have and fiscal instability of our country. And we also have to grow the economy. In order to grow the economy, you have to have confidence, and you have to have less regulation, and you have to have a Congress and the Senate down in D.C. that are willing to work together. And why aren't they working together? Because you've got career politicians down there that refuse to work together to do what's right for the American people. And until we start getting people down there that aren't career politicians, that have never been a politician before, you're going to get the same thing you're getting right now, which is gridlock, dysfunction, and failure. And the sequestration is a great example of that. This is only 2% of the budget, 2.4% of the budget. If you can't deal with this right now, well, quite frankly, they shouldn't be taking a paycheck until they can fix this on a small part of the budget right now. And if they really can't deal with this, how are they going to deal with the bigger issues coming down the road? This is just a small part of what they need to do down the road. This is a very, very small part. They should literally resign and come home if they can't deal with 2.4% of the budget right now.
Okay. Our third question will be from Janet Wu.
I'm directed first to you, Mr. Winslow. One of your Democratic opponents, Stephen Lynch, says now that he would like to raise the cap on Social Security by over $100,000, thereby forcing those at the very top level of income to pay more money into Social Security. Do you agree this is the right approach? And the second part of this question is, what changes do you support to keep Social Security solvent for the next generation?
Well, I don't agree with Congressman Lynch on that. I do think we need to take a comprehensive look at our entitlement spending in the federal government. Right now, the federal spending annually is $3.6 trillion, but if we were to actually fulfill the existing promises of the entitlement programs, including Social Security, it would require $46 trillion today to be funded for these programs. That means that everybody who's in their 20s or people who are younger than their 20s, that promise of Social Security is an empty promise. I think that we need to have a comprehensive look. One of the things that I've considered is means testing on the receiving end. I just had a meeting today where a multimillionaire is receiving Social Security, and he doesn't really need it. And so I'd like to look at the ways that we can save money that are consistent with the promise that was made of Social Security to be a safety net to prevent senior and elderly poverty in America. And that's something that I think would go directly to the bottom line.
Do you think that would be enough to deal with the imbalance and the huge gap there? By just taking it away from the people that you consider to be that don't need the Social Security?
That alone would not do it, but there's other things that can be done. So, for example, the longevity of Americans has increased significantly since the time Social Security was first enacted, and we have to protect that expectation, that promise that was made to our senior citizens. But to the folks that are in their teens and 20s, we need to make sure that Social Security will be there when they also approach their senior years as well. Now, for them, that time may come later in their life than the folks in the 1940s and the 1950s. But it still has to be fair and have parity so that people in their last years of their life aren't left defenseless, aren't left penniless in our society.
So you would consider raising the age for them?
I think that one of the things that's been considered, and I certainly want to have an open dialogue about this, is whether or not the age for younger people should be gradually adjusted to be referenced to longevity, that is, the actual age that people are in good health.
Thank you, Mr. Gomez.
Social Security was enacted in 1935, and it is a promise to the seniors. And the seniors that are in there right now, or even close to achieving Social Security, should have zero impact on their benefits. That's the first rule right there. Now, you have to address, though, the long-term entitlement of Social Security. And what we have, we don't have a lack of ideas down in D.C. right now. What we have is a lack of courage to actually even think about talking about these issues, because what happens is they get demagogued by a certain side, and then people get scared for no good reason, because there's actually some good ideas out there. Means testing is one of them. And, I mean, Mr. Winslow touched on it briefly here. Means testing is one where I would argue that Warren Buffett probably doesn't need Social Security.
What about Congressman Lynch's suggestion of raising the cap by over $100,000?
I just think there's different ways to do it. Another way is, like I said, if you're on Social Security or you're closest to receiving Social Security, you're not going to be impacted. For people my generation and my kids' generation, then I think you can think about increasing the retirement age. I mean, when Social Security was enacted in 1935, the life expectancy was considerably less than it is now. I mean, you have people in their 80s running marathons right now still. Hopefully we'll see some in a couple of weeks in Boston. But there's another one of the solutions that's out there is that you can increase the age by a month over 24 years, and you can increase it by 2 years over 24 years. 1 month per year for 24 years. But this would have no impact on the current people that are receiving Social Security or those even close to receiving Social Security. Those are two ways that you can address it without having to address what Congressman Lynch is doing.
A couple things come to mind. First off, it was the greatest generation, essentially, that built this nation. And it's this generation really is squandering all the other great things that greatest generation built. Some folks, some members of the greatest generation are the ones that are depending on some Social Security benefits. I think we have to be crystal clear, as a government, that they've earned it. And when we talk about entitlement programs, these are earned benefits. These are people that sacrifice greatly in order to have some type of modest Social Security benefit in their retirement age. So I think people that are either retired or getting close to retirement should feel confident that our government is not going to change the rules on them at this moment in time. Now, having said that, every generation sacrifices. And there are a lot of young people out here, some students from Stonehill College, a great school. I'm confident that they're willing to sacrifice as well. And part of that sacrifice might likely be raising the age in which you qualify for Social Security benefits.
But do you agree with Congressman Lynch's idea of raising the cap on the income
I
by
would not raise the
100,000?
cap as a first resort. I
I'm sorry?
would not raise a cap as a first resort. I mean, it seems like some folks' immediate reaction to solve a problem is to raise more taxes. And we should look at ways to try to build a program. One way you do it, quite candidly, is having more people work and more people paying in to the Social Security system, you know, to make it last a much longer period of time. Thinking about raising the retirement age at certain blocks of age, looking at the indexes you use for purposes of increases, not for current retirees and not for those people that are close, you know, to poverty level in terms of benefits, but there are a number of other things you can do besides jumping to raise the amount of income that would be taxed for Social Security.
Let's move on to our second round. The next question is from Chris Burrell.
And this goes to Mr. Gomez first. Why do you think Scott Brown lost last November?
Look, Scott Brown is he's a great person, and I think he was a great senator. And you know, he was one of those individuals that reached across the aisle and was willing to work with both sides. He was that rare entity down in D.C. that was willing to buck his party when he thought it was right, and to not be stuck in his ideological positions like a lot of the career politicians are down there. And you know, it's sad that Scott Brown lost, because he's the kind of person that we need down in D.C. representing the Commonwealth of Massachusetts.
Mr. Sullivan?
Listen, I'm not a political pundit. I was quite honestly shocked in terms of the election results. You know, nationally, I was particularly shocked in terms of the Senate race here in the Commonwealth of Massachusetts. I thought Scott Brown did a phenomenal job. I think, quite candidly, President Obama was extremely popular. And as a result of that popularity, I think Senator Warren got a lot of the benefit of President Obama's popularity, and I think it hurt a little bit in terms of Scott Brown. I think the other thing is, I think the brand in terms of the Republicans suffered a little bit in that last national election. I don't think as a party we did as good of a job in terms of reaching out to what I think are natural core constituencies. And those are obviously people that are very much fiscally conservative. You know, those are people that are looking for gainful employment. Those are people in both inner cities and the suburbs. I don't think we did a good job in terms of reaching out to women and making a good connection in terms of the values of the Republican Party. So I think there's a lot of things that we failed to do as a party that helped, I think, implicate the results in terms of Senator Brown's election.
Mr. Winslow?
Yeah, I agree that I think that Senator Brown was hurt by the national brand of the Republican Party. The fact is that for the next 30 years, the majority of American voters will either be women, millennials, or new Americans. And we have to find a way to have the principles of the Republican Party, the party of Lincoln, be relevant to and to speak to that majority of American voters. You know, the Republican Party's founding principles are principles that most people agree with. They just don't associate them with Republicans anymore. And so if you think of a pyramid, you have the individual is at the top of the pyramid, and you have the community subordinate to the individual, and that's basically what's good for you is good for us. The Democratic philosophy is an inverse pyramid where the community is on top and the individual is subordinate to the community, and their philosophy is what's good for us is good for you. And the truth is probably somewhere in the middle, but that's not a debate that we have in Massachusetts because we have a one-party monopoly. These principles, these founding principles of the Republican Party, the party of Lincoln, freedom, respect for the individual, responsibility, and opportunity. I want to have people in this race in Massachusetts as the first opportunity after 2012 to redefine the brand. We're not the grand old party. We have to be what we are, which is the great opportunity party. Growth, opportunity, prosperity, GOP, and have that message of hope, be a message that we reach out to the majority of American voters.
Thank you. The next question is from Adam Riley.
I want to go back briefly to the Aaron Swartz case, and Mr. Sullivan, this question is going to you first. As senators, or as a senator, you would have oversight of the Justice Department's workings and also of telecommunications policy. As you all know, and as everyone in this room knows, Carmen Ortiz, the current U.S. attorney, has been under fire for her handling of Aaron Swartz's prosecution. He was accused of illegally downloading about 5 million academic articles from the site JSTOR, and at one point faced up to 35 years in prison. He committed suicide before going to trial. As a former U.S. attorney, to kick us off, did Carmen Ortiz go too far here, or was she suitably aggressive?
Well, I don't know, to be honest with you, as to whether she went too far or was she suitably aggressive. You know, sadly, we don't know all the facts. I would tell you it was horrible in terms of somebody taking their life. I think of my experience as a state prosecutor and a federal prosecutor, and there were several instances in which a defendant waiting trial actually committed suicide. And you know, there's no worse feeling, quite candidly, you know, from a prosecutor's perspective, to think that you know the weight of those circumstances might help drive somebody to committing suicide. I think the legitimate questions being asked by the Department of Justice to try to find out as much information. You know, what we learn, at least from the media, would suggest that it likely might have been too heavy-handed, but we don't know certainly all the facts. We're not privy to all the evidence that Carmen Ortiz had. I would not want to rush to judgment in anybody, but certainly, you know, I feel horrible in terms of him taking his life.
Just a quick follow-up before we move on to Mr. Winslow. We do know from what Attorney General Holder said that while Swartz was at one point facing up to 35 years in prison, according to Holder, there was never any intent that he served more than a few months. Is it appropriate to confront someone with more than 3 decades behind bars if you really only want them to go to jail for a few months?
No, and I think these are legitimate questions, quite candidly, and when you look at the indictments, and I had the opportunity, like other folks, to take a look at them from outside the office, not inside the office, and it appeared that the number of indictments was unnecessary to address what the government might thought was something wrong. Now, again, we don't know all the facts. Obviously, MIT, I think at some point in time, may have referred the matter. When I was United States Attorney, it wasn't unusual for either an institution or a company to essentially to come to the United States Attorney's office and to discuss a matter. And we always gave them the right to essentially not pursue it in terms of a criminal case, unless there were other victims or if it was a crime of violence. This likely would have been one of those matters because it didn't appear that he did anything for profit. It appeared that all the articles that he downloaded were readily available anyways through certain networks that students and researchers have access to. So, I mean, you ask the question, 35 years seems to be way in excess of what is necessary. Even 6 months may have been completely unnecessary, you know, in terms of the conduct. But, you know.
Thank you, Mr. Sullivan. Mr. Winslow?
Thank you. I had mentioned the Swartz case in my opening statement only because I feel so strongly about it. But there's a policy issue here as well beyond that particular case. The policy issue is we have criminalized inordinately wide swaths of conduct in the United States, which directly impacts our freedom as citizens. When the government is empowered in its discretion to prosecute us for what would seemingly be innocent or even ordinary behaviors. There was a book, The Criminalization of Everything, and the idea is that that's a way to intrude on, impede our individual liberties as Americans. I think that there is a role here in the U.S. Senate to re-examine our criminal laws and to shift, I think, some of the discretion away from prosecutorial authorities, perhaps back to the courts. I was a judge for almost 8 years, and I had to impose minimum mandatory sentences, and what was shocking to me is that we should have some justice in Massachusetts that's uniform regardless of your zip code, regardless of your race in Massachusetts. And that's not the case when it comes down to prosecutorial discretion. And as a judge, I've had to impose minimum mandatory sentences, and I did. I took my oath. But I was shocked to see as I would go from county to county to county, depending on the prosecutor's point of view or their campaign platform, some people would have minimum mandatories, and some people would not be prosecuted for minimum mandatories. So I think that we have to have that safety valve in a democratic process to have the checks and balances, not to have unfettered power concentrated in the hands of any one branch of government, that we have to do that in order to assure our freedom as Americans.
Mr. Gomez, what's your take on Carmen Ortiz's handling of the Swartz case?
Look, I don't know all the facts of the case, but I will say...
Based on what you know.
What I know is, the thing that alarms me is that it's the potential politicization of a department such as the Department of Justice. And I think this is why, it's just another example of why people don't trust the career people down in D.C. You have potentially the Justice Department of the United States that's responsible for prosecuting all these high-profile cases, and people don't have the faith that the people that are actually in that department are doing things according to the law, or they're following the law, or they're not overreaching, or they're not stepping too far, and that there's too much politics being played in the Department of Justice such as that. Which is another reason why, as part of as a senator down in D.C., one of our jobs is to go through the judges that are being nominated by the president, for the Supreme Court and for other parts as well. And I will say that I will not have a litmus test. I think any senator that has a litmus test, shouldn't be a senator. I think that, you follow the Constitution, you're ethical, and you've got a good record, then those are the kind of people, whether they're nominated by a Republican or a Democrat, are the ones that should be in charge of being judges or justices. And I think a department such as the Department of Justice in this instance potentially has the politicization, and it's not just the Department of Justice, other departments where people are losing faith that there's too much politics down in D.C., and this is just a good example potentially.
The next question will be asked by Janet Wu.
This goes to you first, Mr. Winslow. Last week, Senator Rand Paul filibustered on the subject of drone strikes for 13 hours. His Republican colleagues, however, Senator Lindsey Graham and Senator John McCain, disagreed with him. Who do you think was right? But more importantly, could you see yourself, if elected, filibustering, holding up business on the Senate floor for 13 hours by delivering a filibuster?
Yeah, I have great respect for Senators Graham and McCain. I think in that case they got it wrong. I actually issued a statement as Senator Rand Paul was on the floor of the Senate, supporting his filibuster and saying that if I were in the U.S. Senate right now, I would stand with Rand Paul on this issue. And the issue was whether or not, or to clarify, the use of drones on U.S. soil as to U.S. citizens. And there was some waffling by the Department of Justice under Attorney General Holder about what the policy in fact was. But what I liked about and what I admired about, and why I was very proud to be a Republican when Senator Paul was on the floor of the Senate at that time, was he did it in a way that got him to the podium. He stood up. He stood up and he stated his piece, and he wanted to be counted. He didn't just mail it in like so many of these senators do to shut things down. It's somewhat shocking to me that they filibuster and shut things down, and then ultimately there's a vote of 95-0. In this case, the filibuster worked. The next day, Senator Paul got his answer, which was a clarification of the U.S. drone policy. And I think that he did the right thing in that case. It shouldn't be used to excess. It certainly shouldn't be used for delay for its own sake. But to advance policy differences, absolutely. Somebody has to stand up for Massachusetts. I hope to be that person.
So you would do it? You could see yourself delivering a filibuster for 13 hours or even longer if you felt it was appropriate on the rights issue? It's your mind over bladder at that point. I would absolutely go down there and I would stand up until I got an answer about these issues, about the violation of civil liberties. But here's what I don't understand. When the civil liberties of the United States citizens were at stake, where were the Democrats? Where was Ed Markey? Where was Steve Lynch in the Congress when they had this issue before this? It was left to one senator, and I was proud to stand with him in spirit. I hope to have the chance to stand with him on the floor.
Thank you,
Mr. Gomez, where do you stand on it? And could you see yourself filibustering for 13 hours on the issue?
I absolutely agree with Senator Rand on what he did and the position he took. And it has been stated that as a result, the president and the administration came out and clarified their drone policy within the United States. Now, in terms of whether I would go down there and filibuster for 13 hours, look, I used to be a SEAL. I think I could go for a few days. And I'd have no problem. I would actually say I'd probably go longer than a week. But anyways, in terms of going down there and filibuster, for a position like that where you are defending the liberties of the American people and the Constitution, then that is exactly the right thing to do. Now, if this was a different administration, if it was a Republican administration, I think you would have seen other senators from the other side taking the exact same position that Senator Paul took. And that's the problem again when you've got the career politicians down in D.C. that are so stuck in their ideological positions that they only see one side and they're blind. So I commend strongly Senator Paul for what he did, and I just wish more people would have done it as well.
Mr. Sullivan? Could you go for 13 hours, or would you want to go for 13 hours?
Well, if it's an important enough issue, I'd go for as long as humanly possible. I think it's worth standing up for. I think Senator Paul was asking legitimate questions. In knowing how the administration works, I suspect he asked it prior to the filibuster and got no response at all from the executive branch of government. That's a complete failure in terms of two branches of government trying to effectively work together. So his only option at that point in time was the filibuster. And after 13 hours, he finally got an answer. It's a legitimate question. Are we using drones to spy on United States citizens in the United States?
So
Now,
Senators Graham and Senators McCain were wrong on this one.
well, wrong in terms of their criticism, in terms of Senator Paul? I think so. I mean, let's be real about this for a second. It wasn't like he was interrupting a lot of business that the Senate was doing. I mean, the Senate, quite candidly, appears to be in recess for the last 4 years. They've not passed a budget, one of their basic obligations that they have, a democratically controlled United States Senate, and they can't even pass a budget. So Senator Paul did not do anything to interfere with any more important business of the Senate. The important business at hand is, what are you doing about American citizens on U.S. soil? Completely different question about folks that are committing treason against our country and working side by side with our enemies in foreign soil. So Senator Paul was right to ask the question. The executive should have responded to his question without the need for a filibuster.
Okay, thank you. We're going to move on to what we refer to as our version of the seventh inning stretch, a lightning round of fast and lighter questions, perhaps, at least some of them. We'll start with Mr. Gomez. We'll go down the line. Mr. Gomez, what is your favorite cheat food?
Cheat food? Swedish fish.
Mr. Sullivan?
Cheat? I don't know what a cheat.
Cheat. Presumably non-healthy snack items.
Well, that's a long list of food. I would say Doritos.
Which flavor, Mr. Sullivan?
The regular flavor of Doritos, ranch.
It's got to be M&M's for me, and I do eat the greens. So.
Okay. Again, starting with Mr. Gomez, do you support term limits for the United States Senate, and if so, how many terms?
Absolutely. I mean, the president's term limited. This is another reason why we have the career politicians down there doing what they're doing, because they have actually no fear of eventually getting voted out.
So how many terms?
2 terms. I would never ask anybody to do something I wouldn't do myself. 2 terms for the Senate. The president's term limited, the congressman should be term limited, and senators should definitely be term limited.
Mr. Sullivan? Do you support term limits, and if so, how many?
Yeah, in the concept, clearly, I think it's very healthy to have turnover. Self-imposed term limits for me. When I first ran for the Massachusetts House of Representatives, I made a commitment I'd serve no more than 3 terms. And then shortly after my 3rd term, I left to take over as district attorney of Plymouth County. But when you think about it from a practical perspective, it's highly unlikely that we're going to pass constitutional amendments to limit the terms of the Senate. So it's in the power of the hands of the voters, and you should exercise that power when people aren't living up
Let me
to the
just
task.
clarify. Would you commit to only serving a certain number of terms if elected?
Sure, I would never serve more than 2 terms in the United States Senate. In my opinion, if you can't accomplish what needs to be accomplished in 12 years, then you should get out of the way and let somebody else try doing it.
Mr. Winslow?
I think 12 years is plenty of time.
I used to work as a house painter when I was in high school, and my boss was this old German guy who said, Dan, always remember the forgets. And I said, remember the forgets? What are you talking about? And he said, get in, get fast, get good, get lost. And it's good advice for politics as it is for paint. When I ran for the House and the legislature, I took a 3-term maximum term limit. I intend to abide by that. If I were elected to the U.S. Senate, I would seek no more than 2 full terms in the U.S. Senate. I think that competition is good, but Mike has a good point about the constitutional limitation and the difficulty of that. I think it's right. I'll impose it on myself. So we have to have campaign finance reform. We have to do
All right,
things that
this is a
increase
lightning
democracy.
round, so we need just a
Okay.
quick.
Rolling thunder.
Who is your favorite United States Senator from Massachusetts of all time? Mr. Gomez?
I would say Senator Brooke.
Senator Brooke?
I'd have to say JFK, and probably I remember him more as a president, but I was too young probably to recall him as a senator. But he was very inspirational, particularly in terms of young people, to get them actively involved in public service. So
Thank
I
you,
would have to say Senator
Mr.
Kennedy.
Winslow?
Well, my favorite contemporary senator is Scott Brown, of course, but I do like John Adams, the drafter of the Constitution and the framework of our country.
President John Adams. We'll give you that one as a historic figure, but I don't believe Senator Adams ever served in the Senate. His son, is there a historian in the audience? There was a senator, John Quincy Adams
He
served.
served as a senator.
But because he is such a revered figure, we're going to give you a pass on that.
Did I get it wrong?
All right. Roger Ailes has recently called the president lazy. Do you agree?
Look, the president's a smart person. I don't personally think the president's lazy. Do I agree with what his policies are? Absolutely not. I think that he's got good intentions, but I don't think that what his policies are what's best for America. And that's one of the reasons I'm running for the United States Senate.
Mr. Sullivan?
I wouldn't want to call anybody lazy, particularly the President of the United States. And I think that his style in terms of leadership is a lot different than mine. I like to get much more involved in the substance of the issues. He seems to want to take a much higher look at things. I wouldn't refer to anybody, particularly the President of the United States, as being lazy.
Mr. Winslow?
That statement is symptomatic of what's going on in Washington, where people vilify the opposition rather than disagreeing with them. And so I don't agree with the statement, but I believe that we have to get back to some sense of decency and civility in American politics, because the person who is against you on Monday on the merits may well be the person who is with you on Thursday if you don't doubt their patriotism or smear their name or attack their family. That's what we have to get back to in American politics, to be Americans first and to disagree on the merits.
Finally, how many years of your tax returns are you prepared to release?
I'm prepared to release 6 years of the tax return, just like Scott Brown did, and it's a full term of the U.S. Senate.
Well, most of mine are going to be very much uninteresting. I served for a long time in government service. My salary is a matter of public record. I mean, I'll release what everybody else seems to think would be a reasonable number of years to release.
Yeah, I've committed to releasing 10 years of tax returns and all of the schedules to have complete transparency of my finances as well as the taxes that I pay, so that people understand that I've not dodged anything and I've not tried to cut any corners, that I've paid my fair share in accordance with the law.
And I would say this. I mean, obviously, I think we're all agreeing to release our tax returns. I think in some instances, that's more about rhetoric than, facts or reality. I mean, we have to file financial disclosure forms. I did it for years when I served in the Department of Justice. Those are the requirements. I don't want to discourage
Well, let me just,
good people.
we need to move on only because of our time delay. I'd like to start with round 3. These questions are going to be just a little bit different. The panelists are going to ask a specific question to each candidate, and the other candidates will have an opportunity to follow up if they like. And the first question will be from Chris Burrell.
This goes to Mr. Gomez. Mr. Gomez, you lobbied Governor Patrick for the interim U.S. Senate seat, but you refused to release the letter you sent him asking for the appointment. You laid out your arguments for the job to him, and now you're doing the same to voters. Why not let them see that letter?
I have no qualms releasing the letter to Governor Patrick. This was a unique opportunity for the governor to reach across the aisle and appoint someone like myself, who's not a career politician, who is willing to go and work with the president on the hard issues that the country faces right now. And unfortunately, I didn't even get a response from the governor's office. Ironically, the person I hand-delivered it to was Mo Cowan.
So will you release that letter tomorrow?
Excuse me, what?
Will you release that letter tomorrow?
Absolutely.
Okay.
Mr. Sullivan, Mr. Winslow, do you care to respond to that?
No, I didn't ask Governor Patrick to appoint me as United States Senator. So I'm going to ask the voters of the Commonwealth of Massachusetts to do that, and I'm looking forward to engaging the public.
I'm also going to ask the voters, and I hope to ask it more insistently and with a harder earnest than Mike, but we'll leave that to the voters. We're good friends, and we're all of these, by the way, every one of these gentlemen is better than the alternatives that will be offered up by the Democrats. And so my hope is that we'll all be standing together on May 1.
Thank you. The next question will be from Adam Sullivan to Adam Riley to
Yeah,
Mr.
Mr. Sullivan, this is a question for you. Your campaign manager, Paul Moore, was recently the campaign manager for Richard Tassay, who ran for Congress last year as a socially moderate or even socially liberal pro-gay marriage Republican. Today, the Boston Globe reported that on the issues page of your website, a substantial amount of language was pulled almost verbatim from Richard Tassay's site. So my question is, do the points of view expressed on your website express what you genuinely believe or what you think will get you elected?
Well, I've been in public service for a number of years. People that know me know that I'm not afraid of standing up and taking positions on issues. Paul Moore, I think, is a very decent human being. We started this campaign a little bit late. We did it all with grassroots volunteers, no budget. We continue to rely very heavily on volunteers. It's hard for me to be critical of people who are volunteering and trying to be helpful with regards to posting positions. The positions that are on the website are pretty much positions around the economy and education that are positions that I've taken publicly in terms of the importance
Healthcare,
of
though, also
education.
Israel.
Yes, healthcare, and my position in terms of the national healthcare program. So there's nothing on there that I would say that contradicts positions that I've taken historically.
Do you think you might fine-tune that section of the site so that it reflects more,
Yes.
authentic Michael Sullivan? Because I took a look before coming to the forum tonight, and a lot of the language is still up there. I know you guys were getting ready for this.
Well, again, we're relying solely on volunteers. I'm not going to be critical of somebody that volunteered their time to try to do something to help promote our efforts in terms of the United States Senate. And over the period of these next several weeks, what you're going to see is the positions that I'm taking that I think would be important in terms of both the Commonwealth of Massachusetts and our country to essentially be posted on the website. So there'll be constant updates and refinements of those issues.
Just one last question. I'll let your opponents jump in. Did you read the issues attributed to you or the points of view attributed to you before it was posted?
Yeah, actually, I didn't read them, but they were shared with me generally. Paul essentially told me that he was going to be posting, some issues on the website. Shared with me generally. He said he was comfortable with those positions, and I said I was. And again, this has been a fast-moving campaign. We went from a dead stop to several hundred volunteers in the field collecting over 30,000 signatures in the matter of a couple of weeks. I think that's phenomenal.
Thank you.
Mr. Winslow, do you care to respond to that?
No, I will be doing the same thing with danwinslow.com. As the campaign evolves, we'll be posting issues and proposals on the website so that people can take a look at them. I will read my proposals before I put them up on the website and hopefully be able to convince the voters of their worth.
Mr. Gomez, do you care to respond?
I think Mr. Sullivan has spoken for his website. I'll say that I've never run a campaign. I've never been a politician, and I write my stuff, and I write my speeches, and I write my positions, and I'm very clear and comfortable. I know who I am, and I know what I believe in, so I'm comfortable.
All right, the next question will be from Janet Wu.
Mr. Winslow, you have a reputation for, shall I say, out-of-the-box theatrics. You sent jars of marshmallow fluff to the governor's office. You held a beer pong fundraiser, although I understand there was no beer there. And you praised a film that called President Obama a dangerous post-colonial radical. Is this senatorial behavior?
I praised a film that called that. Was that a retweet?
Yes.
Okay, well, retweets aren't endorsements, folks. I think...
But why did you retweet it if you didn't believe it? Why did you retweet it if you didn't believe it?
Things are interesting. I think it was probably Gabriel's movie. But the thing is that I believe that people have a disconnect from people who are in public life. In the case of the fluff, Governor Patrick had proposed to cut local aid. And this is a direct parallel, by the way, to the federal government. Governor Patrick had proposed to cut local aid as the first way to balance the budget. I said, before you cut local aid, I'm in the House, cut the fluff out of the state budget. His budget chief convened a meeting where he said that there is no fluff in the state budget. So I put together a list of 10 ideas that we could do, and I'd do this, by the way, as a senator. Things that we can do to make government more cost-effective, more effective for delivering services to the people. And so I realized that nobody reads letters, 6-page, single-spaced letters with ideas in state government, so I packaged them all into jars of fluff and arranged them in a pyramid and delivered the fluff to the budget chief. Later we sent it to the homeless veterans, by the way, and they loved it. But here's the key thing. It engaged the dialogue. In fact, I got a letter back from the governor's budget chief, and he actually agreed with many of the ideas so that we are going to be able to reduce the budget. And that's what I want to do at the federal government level as well. I think that we need to have government be relevant to the people once again, because government has become so irrelevant in so many people's lives that there is a connection between who governs and how they govern and the decisions that are made in Washington on everyday life. So I believe in my capacity in all 3 branches of government, as a judge, as the chief counsel to the governor during a fiscal crisis, and now as a legislator. And mind you, I'm in the loyal opposition. My role is to poke back against and to speak truth to power in the state government, and I intend to do the same thing down in Washington, because people have to ask the questions and people have to take the stands, and sometimes it's good to make a point.
So we are going to continue to see creative demonstrations from you if elected? And will you continue to tweet on your own as opposed to having your staff tweet, et cetera, and
my staff
retweeting?
is trying to pry my hands away from my keyboard on Twitter, and they've actually formed at Team Winslow because I won't give them my password. But you know, I think it's actually refreshing. And I'm going to tell you this: I'm going to make mistakes sometimes, and I'm going to have ideas that may land with a thud. But I believe that ideas are the means by which we move society forward. And if people don't like my ideas, my rejoinder is, then what's your better idea? Because it's only by engaging in that discourse, that thesis and thesis and antithesis, to get a synthesis of the better approach. That's how we move America forward. And that's why I want to go down to Washington and engage Democrats. I don't want to be disrespectful of different points of view. And by the way, Senator Rand Paul in his filibuster, a complete gentleman, if you noticed, a complete gentleman. And that's the kind of model that I believe that we need to take down to Washington and re-inject into our federal government so that decent people can come up with good ideas, or not, but exchange those in the fulcrum of debate.
Thank you, Mr. Winslow. Mr. Gomez, do you care to respond to that?
Sure, I didn't catch the first part of the question, but
A question about
Could you
Mr.
see
Winslow's
yourself
reputation
delivering
for
jars
theatrics.
of marshmallow
Oh, okay.
fluff? Could you see
What?
yourself tweeting, you know, or retweeting things that perhaps you may not agree with, but you think are interesting, as Mr. Winslow just said?
ever since I went to the Naval Academy and served, you know, for 9 years and was a pilot on a carrier and was a SEAL, I've always let my actions speak for themselves. Now, of course, now, you know, things have changed, and we've got Twitter, we've got Facebook, and we've got other things out there, so of course I'm engaged in those, but I'm comfortable with who I am, and my actions speak for themselves, and I don't need to kind of grandstand and do things like that, so I'm very comfortable with who I am.
Mr. Sullivan?
Yeah, you know, my parents set an example for us in terms of the way that we treat other people, in terms of respect and kindness. I just cannot see myself participating in that type of theatrics unless it was for the sole purpose of trying to be humorous. You know, I've had many serious positions during the course of my life, and I've always taken my responsibilities very seriously as well. Try not to take myself too serious, but the responsibilities I do. And I would never try to embarrass, humiliate, or to call somebody else a name. When you talk about trying to find common ground for the common good, I try to do everything to advance that, you know, not to you know, prevent it from happening. So my style is to, no matter you know, whether I disagree with somebody strongly, is to be very respectful, you know, to somebody else's position and opinion, because it, from their perspective, it's very legitimate in terms of the position they take. So theatrics has not been a big part of my life unless it's at home, having a lot of fun with the kids and the nieces and nephews.
Thank you. We are rapidly running out of time, so I would ask that you please hold your applause until the very end, and I'm going to ask the candidates to give as succinct answers as possible to the next two questions. The next one is from Chris Burrell, and we'll start with Mr. Gomez.
All right, Mr. Gomez, after a series of horrific mass murders in the past year, do you believe the sale of assault weapons should be reined in at all nationally? Should the background checks should be beefed up, or background checks at gun shows? What's your stance on that?
You know, I have 4 kids that are 13 down to 8, and obviously when Newtown happened, you know, it was more than I could bear. It was, I just couldn't watch it after a while. And, you know, I'm a firm believer in the Second Amendment and the Bill of Rights, but I believe that we should close the gun show loophole, and it has to be tied to mental illness. We still have 20 states out there that don't report their mental illness data to the federal government. So I definitely, this is an area where you can get bipartisan agreement and make movement and think about what actually is one of the causes of what happened in Newtown, and that is it should have had a background check. It should have been tied to mental health, and that's where I think we should go first.
What about assault weapons?
You know, we tried the assault weapons ban in '94 for 10 years, and I know that the intent was good, but the result wasn't what the intent wanted it to be. And I don't believe that we need to do an assault weapon ban. I think what we need to do is make sure that the people that pass a background check are able to buy a weapon, because I've seen it. I mean, I've fired probably every single weapon that they're talking about, and I've seen it what happens when the wrong people are able to use the weapons. So it's more important to make sure that we have the background checks and people are qualified to buy the weapon first.
Mr. Sullivan?
I mean, it's horrific. You know, I can't imagine, you know, the sadness that those families in that community has felt. I was at ATF when we had the Virginia Tech mass killing. Our agency got involved in the investigation. You know, that particular killer, in fact, was adjudicated mentally ill and should not have been able to acquire the firearms that he did. It was a complete failure in terms of our system. We've done a great job in terms of preventing prohibited persons who are felons from getting guns. We've done a horrible job in terms of preventing people that are adjudicated mentally ill from getting access to firearms. And we saw that after Virginia Tech, and we proposed some additional changes and, in fact, some funding, you know, for states to make those records more readily available. I mean, the fact of the matter is, you know, people like to think that bans are effective. They're completely ineffective. I've seen it from my experience. I've seen it from the research within the Department of Justice. Bans do not accomplish the desired results. So instead of wasting a lot of time and a lot of effort about doing something that would make us feel good and have no real benefit in terms of trying to control gun violence, and that's what we're really talking about. You know, what reasonable measures can we put in place to control gun violence, recognizing that the right to have guns in our country is protected under our Second Amendment. I support that. I was at the Department of Justice at ATF when the Heller decision was argued. I participated in drafting that brief. My chief counsel at ATF co-signed that brief that was argued before the United States Supreme Court. So we have an individual right to own firearms. In all my experiences as a state prosecutor, as a federal prosecutor, as the director of ATF, the circumstances in terms of reducing gun violence was not about taking guns out of the hands of citizens that had them lawfully or were using them legally. It was getting the hands out of prohibited persons,
Mr.
convicted
Sullivan,
felons,
we need to move
and
on.
also adjudicated mentally ill.
Mr. Winslow?
Yeah, I share as well the sorrow of the Newtown tragedy. It's just a horrific crime. The other crimes in Aurora and elsewhere across the country, these mass killings. But I expect that the gun control or gun violence will be an issue that is addressed by the upcoming Congress. And in any such discussion, and I look forward to a reasoned, fact-based discussion, in any such discussion I would ask basically 3 questions. Would it have prevented the Newtown tragedy? Will it stop kids from killing kids with illegal guns in our inner cities? And does it respect the individual freedom under the Second Amendment of the Bill of Rights with respect to the lawful possession of firearms? My concern, and I think Gabriel touched upon it as well, my concern is that if we want to take a problem-solving approach, which I do, that we have to readdress our mental health system nationally, because we've mainstreamed people, and in fact we've just main-streeted people. And so if you have background checks, for example, that fail to comprehend the actual problems, I'm not so sure that background checks alone would solve the problem. I've seen this as a judge. I've seen this in handling gun violence cases, that if you put more laws on law-abiding people, it will be the law-abiding gun owners who aren't the problem in many cases under further constraint, and that the criminals will have freer, fuller use of firearms by consequence, which makes us all less safe. So I think that we need to dial down some of the heat, raise some of the light, and have a reasoned, fact-based discussion that focuses on real solutions that solve problems.
The next question will be from Adam Riley.
Briefly, starting again with Mr. Sullivan. As Senator, would you consider voting to confirm a Supreme Court nominee who backs the repeal of Roe versus Wade?
Well, I would not have a litmus test in terms of the nominee. I think what would be critically important is looking at the person's qualifications, the experience that they bring to the position, as well as whether or not they're going to be faithful to the United States Constitution. Their role as a judge is to call balls and strikes, not to make the law. The law essentially is made by the Congress, not by the court. So there'd be no litmus test. I think you try to get the most qualified people to serve, and I'm confident that presidents of either party can get the most qualified people to serve.
So just to be clear, this may have been an issue that worked against Scott Brown, in fact, in the last Senate election. Do you see the possible overturning of Roe versus Wade as an issue, a significant issue for the country?
Do I see it?
Do you see that as a major, an egregious, well, actually, yeah, let me back up. What's your take on the merits of Roe versus Wade as it was decided?
Oh, as it was decided, I think there are people on both sides of the issues, that question whether or not the United States Supreme Court got it right, from a scholarly perspective, including people that are considered scholars and very much supportive of, women's rights like Lawrence Tribe. So from a purely constitutional perspective, I think there are people on both sides of the aisle that question whether or not the Supreme Court got it right. I mean, we know the Supreme Court got it absolutely wrong in Dred Scott, and there are scholars, constitutional scholars, on both sides of the issue that question, Roe v. Wade as well.
Thank you. Mr. Winslow?
I had overseen judicial selection for Massachusetts as the governor's chief legal counsel, and actually rewrote the way we do judicial appointments in Massachusetts, which the Patrick administration, to its great credit, has continued to pace. Judges shouldn't have agendas other than to follow the Constitution, to follow the law to the best of their human ability. And I think that any kind of a litmus test similarly would not be appropriate with respect to judges, other than no judicial agenda than to follow the Constitution, follow the law. We require public trust and confidence in our judiciary as the referee, if you will, between the branches to assure the protection of individual rights. And we have to have that confidence in knowing that we have the best men and women, who diversity is also a value. And if I were the senator, I would commit to an up or down vote on every federal judicial nominee in the United States. We have 10% vacancy currently in our federal courts, and that is affecting our economy because businesses can't get litigation, they can't enforce patents, and justice cannot be done. In my view, slow justice is no justice, and we have to make sure that the courts have the resources to do that. In fact, I proposed innovation sessions here in Massachusetts to match our innovation economy. There's so much we can do to make our courts work better and more promptly and affordably, and that benefits all of us.
Mr. Gomez?
As I mentioned earlier, there shouldn't be any litmus test when you're looking at judges' qualifications. They should, in terms of for going with them or voting for them. There should be the thing you should be looking at is whether they follow the Constitution, whether they've been ethical, and whether they've done a good job. Those three simple things, whether they're nominated by a Democrat or by a Republican, should be absolutely irrelevant. So we need to fill the judges, obviously. There's a big open ship down there in terms of the number of open judgeships. And people need to look at things without a litmus test, and that's what's delaying things. And that's just another example of what happens when you have the career people down there stuck in their ideological positions, thinking about one thing instead of what's good for America. So there should be zero litmus test.
Thank you.
Our final question will be from Janet Wu.
Immigration's on the front burner in Washington. We're running out of time here, so if you could be very, very concise and give us one change that you think should be made to our laws. And answer the second part of the question, is there any group of undocumented residents who you feel should be given amnesty? I think we're going to start with you, Mr. Winslow.
Thank you. The one change is to solve the immigration naturalization, the ICE that we have now. We should make the front door more affordable, more prompt, more responsive for people who want to come into this country or to stay in this country legally. The Immigration Service, I think, like NOAA for our fishermen, is a bureaucracy that's out of control, it's unresponsive, and they think that they are our masters rather than our servants. And so I believe that a good first place to start is to reform the existing immigration bureaucracy itself. I don't agree with amnesty, by the way, for illegal immigrants, but I do believe before we start having a conversation about a pathway to citizenship, that we should have a trailway to tax paying so that people actually pay for their share and pay their way if they are here. And I do believe that there is one group of illegal immigrants that we should absolutely expedite out of this country, and that's people who break laws against other people, crimes against persons and property. We had a man from China who was stalking a woman. China wouldn't accept him back. When he was released by immigration, he stalked and then killed this poor woman. If a country does not accept back its own criminal citizens, our foreign policy must have immediate consequences of economic proportion that force that country to make that decision and take their people back.
But not even young children that were brought in here by their families at a very young age?
I'm sorry, I did not hear
Even
you.
very young children that were brought into this country at a very young age, not realizing that who are undocumented, who are illegal, you would not give them amnesty?
No, you asked, that's a different question.
No,
You
I
asked-
said where there's any group of residents who should be given amnesty that are undocumented.
No, I think that we have to have a comprehensive approach to immigration reform. We have to make the front door work better. We have to close the back door. That's why I think we need to have these porous borders need to be addressed. And I think that we have to have a comprehensive approach. You've asked me, given the time, that I pick and choose, and I've done that.
Okay, Mr. Gomez, first of all, what's the one change that you would make to our immigration laws? And is there any group of undocumented residents that you would give amnesty to?
I'm a son of immigrants. My parents immigrated here from Colombia a year before I was born. I grew up in an agricultural area, heavily migrant. So I've seen firsthand just the economic benefit of what immigration is. And I'm finally heartened that after so many years of this being such a top-level discussion with actually no motion forward at all, that you now have 8 bipartisan senators, 4 from each side, that are actually working with the president. It looks like that they're going to hopefully get something done, that there is going to be some kind of pathway to citizenship that's not, obviously, not easy, but it's also not going to be impossible. But at the same time, it's going to be tied to securing the border. Because the border is not only an immigration issue, but it is also a national security issue. And if you can't secure the border, then you may as well not have any kind of pathway to citizenship.
And is there any group of undocumented citizens you would give amnesty to at all?
I don't believe in amnesty at all.
Okay. Mr. Sullivan, those 2 questions, please.
Which the first question is,
Are there any, well, first of all, if you were to make one change in the immigration laws, what would it be? And number 2, is there any group of undocumented citizens you would give amnesty to?
well, I would give an amnesty to a group of undocumented that have served our nation in uniform. I think if they've attempted to make our national security and nation stronger, put themselves in harm's way, I think they deserve amnesty and a pathway to citizenship. In fact, I think they should be, their pathway to citizenship should be accelerated. We're a rule of law nation. We expect both citizens and non-citizens to obey the law. There has to be consequences, to those that don't obey the law. I think that there should be some pathways to legal status. I've prosecuted and investigated, horrific circumstances of employers that exploit people that are here illegally. They have no recourse in terms of turning, to government agencies. It's a horrible set of circumstances. I've prosecuted criminal organizations that have trafficked in human beings, that have brought them here illegally and made them participate in sex trade organizations. I think that's unconscionable.
What is your one change to the immigration laws, if you were to suggest one, that you think is most important?
I think border security is critically important. I don't think you can do much in terms of immigration laws and try to remedy the situation until our borders are that much secure. Otherwise, the problem we face today is a problem that the next generation is going to have to deal with. I think border securities and people that are guests in the country essentially complying with our nation's laws.
Thank you. At this time, I'd like to invite each candidate to give a 60-second closing remark. Mr. Gomez?
Thank you very much, Stonehill, and thank you, panelists, and thank you, Michael and Dan. You've heard a lot of great issues out here, and I think that we can agree that, you know, America is a great country, but we've got a lot of issues facing ourselves right now that need to be addressed, and they're not being addressed right now with career politicians down in D.C. And as a result, you need to do some things down there right now, which I plan to do when I get down there, and that is, we talked about them, a couple of them, you need to have term limits. You need to have term limits for senators and congressmen just like we have for the president. You also need to make sure that you don't have thousands of lobbyists running around that were former congressmen and senators that are pushing special interest groups that are continually exacerbating the problem that is down in D.C. right now. Those are the main things. You cannot send another career politician down in D.C. Now, I will endeavor that when I get down to D.C., I will serve with a military man's discipline, a father's sensitivity, and a businessman's experience. America is greater than its politics. I hope that you give our campaign a chance, and God bless America.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Mr. Sullivan, your closing comment?
Thank you. Yeah, I've done a number of things. I've been to a number of places, and I've crossed paths with a lot of different people, you know, from the factory floors to heading up a government agency. Family, friends, colleagues, victims, advocates, and neighbors. They simply know me as Mike. Throughout my career, both in the private sector as well as in public service, from Gillette to working as a state representative, a district attorney, a United States attorney, director of ATF. I've done my best to improve the life of the communities and people that I've served. I'm from Massachusetts. I love our country. I know that the great blessings I have were as a result of the sacrifice in the dreams of others. I also know that Washington's broken, and I'm anxious to make a difference. And I believe that people of common good and common interest can take on these growing challenges in growing risks that our country is facing. And that's the reason why I'm running for the United States Senate. And I hope that you will vote for me on April 30th. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Winslow?
Thank you, Professor. I want to thank Stonehill College and Mike and Gabriel. You know, Massachusetts has always led our nation in times of need. The first shot heard around the world, which led to our independence, the abolitionist movement, which began here and ended slavery, from the time of Alexander Graham Bell and innovation to our biotech to the first public schools, the country has always looked to Massachusetts for leadership. And we're coming to a time in our nation's history where Massachusetts once again can have an opportunity to lead. People are frightened. People are concerned about their future and their children's future, and the politicians in Washington just haven't been or don't want to get this solved. We're not going to solve the problems that we confront as a nation by sending the same people back to Washington, including those that have been there for a decade, in some cases almost 4 decades. That's not going to happen. In fact, electing either of the Democratic nominees would be a sign of surrender that we've given up trying to change America for the better. I believe that the eyes of the nation can be on Massachusetts in this race, and that in this race, at this time, we have a chance to be able to send a message of hope and opportunity to grow America out of this challenging time. I believe that my experience in all 3 branches of government as a judge who received national recognition for innovation and change, as the chief counsel in Massachusetts who grew the $3 billion deficit into a surplus, and as a state legislator who stood up to the machine and brought new ideas to the table. I believe that these are things that are skills that are directly relevant in Washington, and I hope that I can have your vote and earn your support on April 30th. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Winslow. Let me close by offering thanks to our media sponsors this evening, Wicked Local, Gatehouse Media New England, WGBH, and WCVB. Thank you to the students and staff at Stonehill College for attending and helping us put this event together. And thank you to the 3 candidates for stepping up and throwing their hats into the ring. Thank you all very much, and good night.